Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. And apologies for the tech issues that occurred last Friday. If you were waiting around for me and Obi, it never came. And some of those gremlins have hung around, including for today. So we're 5 minutes late starting this, but I'm so glad the tech seems to have ironed itself out, because I think it's fair to say that the man is on the show today is a fan favorite. I think, like, oft requested, someone who's been stirring the pot in all the right ways, including recently Uzo back on the show. You'll see from the titles that we're going to get stuck into another of his favorite topics. He was on the show a couple of months back, talking about not adjacent things about rehab, but certainly more about sort of the mistaken accumulation of advanced practice skills without considering rehab to be an advanced practice discipline. And he's making a case now about a profession-wide issue that could occur if we don't get his act together. And so it was just really pleasing to get him on, because he posted a blog on BJSM's platform, which certainly got chins wagging. And so, as long as my final click of a couple of buttons mean that the tech is working, as I've just bragged about, then Uzo can hopefully hear me. Are you there, mate?
I could hear you. Hi. How you doing?
Brilliant. Right. Well, yeah, that we cut that fine. I'm sorry about the rushing around there, mate.
That's okay.
So tell me a little bit about because obviously we don't need to go all the way back, because we've kind of covered it a bit on this show, and obviously much of the audience will have paid attention to some of the similar sorts of things that you've been talking about in recent years. But tell me about this piece and what motivated you to write it.
Okay, so so the BJSM blog. Well, I'm doing a MSc at the moment in strength and conditioning, and I started that about 3 years ago. And when I started it, I felt that I knew a reasonable amount about exercise prescription and so on. And really, I guess fundamentally, I was sort of frustrated by the fact that we were being told as a profession how to deliver exercise by people who weren't necessarily within the profession per se, which is not a huge problem, but I think we were just following things because it was trending. So I said, okay, so let's find out what these guys do, and also girls as well, and let's try and understand it from their perspective, so I could sort of make sense of it. Now, I already had a sports science degree from previous, and I'd been a personal trainer. And after my first year, quite frankly, I felt like a bit of a fraud, really, as far as exercise prescription was concerned. No, I really did. I really actually felt like a fraud, because, when I'd done my applied sports science degree years ago, which was before really the strength and conditioning profession really became to what it is now. There wasn't loads of literature. There wasn't a lot of people doing things, and it was a really new profession. And as I say, I just, what I realised was how much more there was to it, this idea of exercise prescription. And bearing in mind, we are a profession that, fundamentally, uses exercise as really one of its main, if you like, management tools. And it just sort of struck me that, as a profession, we use exercise, but actually we know fundamentally so little about biomechanics, about training, about exercise training science, even fundamental things, Jack, such as skill acquisition. Okay, the S&C profession, that they go into skill acquisition in huge amounts of detail. And actually, I could take myself back to the very first lecture we had right at the start of my first year. It was called movement. And I thought, okay, I'm a physiotherapist, I know a lot about this.
You thought that would be the comfort zone, yeah? Right.
Actually, a lot of the concepts they were talking about, and a lot of the theoretical underpinning, I had no idea, no idea whatsoever. And actually, I was quite ashamed, really. Bearing in mind, we are supposedly meant to be the exercise and movement professionals, and we use movement all the time. And I put this to the audience, how much skill acquisition did you cover at undergrad? Because if you were like me, it was very little. We covered a bit in neuro, but then really in MSK, it was nothing. And even, I did my MSc later on in physiotherapy. Again, skill acquisition, we didn't cover it at all. And I can't imagine that it's changed very much with the push for a more diagnostic based postgraduate education. And it just sort of made me think, really, it's how can we not value this when it's so important for what we do as healthcare professionals and such like. So that's what motivated it, in essence.
No, that's brilliant, and great coverage of some of the key themes then of the piece. I think because and the audience knows that me and you are fairly well aligned with regards to our frustrations on complacency, a word that you actually wrote up in the piece a couple of times, where I think there has been a degree of complacency in our profession and our industry to not necessarily recognize the expertise that can be that is in S&C, and that therefore you're almost there's been this retrospective bolting on of some of the easier concepts almost, or inferring that actually those are what are bolstering our modalities. Yeah. And so I agree with that. I think one of the arguments I would try and put there, though, partly as devil's advocate, but also some of which I would agree with, is that some of the specificity, and this isn't necessarily a critique of the piece, but I think in S&C terms, I think that what is powering some of your argument in the piece is that the specificity that they bring to bear in a sporting context and in what you're trying to do to strengthen and condition bodies is not necessarily something in MSK we've come to recognize is necessary always to help people with their pain. And so the complacency that sometimes can occur where we play fast and loose with those principles, I would say that sometimes, though, the specificity isn't necessary and therefore wouldn't add more. And then we tend to lean into sort of communication skills and more generalized management and pacing strategy. Would you say that that's fair, or do you think actually we should be more specific all the time?
Yeah. No, not at all. And anyone who knows me and anyone who works with me, they know that actually I've said so many times before, not every patient requires an exercise solution.
Right, yeah.
And whether that's a general exercise solution or a more specific exercise solution. Yeah, not every patient requires that. And certainly in my own practice, I can think of times where actually I just talk with the patient.
Right, yeah.
So there isn't a need. I'm not going one way or the other, but what I am saying is, okay, if we are talking about rehabilitation in the round, then, why wouldn't it be appropriate for us to have a reasonable understanding of some of the underpinnings around skill acquisition? Okay, for us to use movement as a treatment modality. Why wouldn't it be appropriate for us to have an underpinning of the role that language plays within skill acquisition? Yeah. Why wouldn't it be appropriate for us to have a sensible practical underpinning around biomechanics? Okay, so how many of us are able to really apply this principle of lever arms with our exercise prescription? Really able to do it, because we can all go back to biomechanics and movement 101 in our undergrad, where we covered levers and mechanics. That was forgotten for most of us, and that was me included. Yeah, up until a couple of years ago. I'm no different here. Why is it not important to have an awareness of physiology? But physiology as it relates to the key organ of the body that we seem to want to influence all the time. And coming back to this idea of strength and conditioning, the problem with it is everyone seems to forget everything else associated with strength and conditioning. Everyone just assumes it's about getting people stronger. Sure. Yeah. And it's about lifting weights and it's about Olympic weightlifting. No, it's not. Some of these key underpinnings, they underpin movement, full stop.
Right.
Yeah.
So the principles,
it's movement,
the
full
principles
stop.
apply
Yeah.
broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what happens is people get people get stuck with the strength bit. Yes, it's important, but actually, there's much more to it. You know,
Yeah.
you
Do
still
you think
got to you still
one
got
of
to
the
have.
things I want to ask, just because as you're saying that, I'm kind of just on a personal level, because like we've not worked together clinically. Obviously, we know and we're colleagues when it comes to being educators and stuff, and we're getting to know each other more and more, including conversations that include like this one where it's quite immersive when it's live. But also, like, I do associate you as being like an exercise nut in a way, like the inspirational commando that I know, right? You beast yourself, you hold high standards for yourself physically, and so therefore, do you think that people make the association that you therefore have an exercise solution, or would infer that there's an exercise solution for
Yeah,
literally
no,
everything? Like,
I
do you
think
get stereotyped that way?
yeah, I think they do. No. I think they do. I mean, my colleagues who I work with in the NHS know that's not me at all.
Sure.
Actually, I post things every now and again. They're a little bit controversial, but not rude. But certainly, it's to make people think. And I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues on Friday. A little bit of context. Okay, I've posted. I think I posted a video. One of my patients has multidirectional instability. We've been working with her for several months, and my point here is that actually it's about being multimodal. Yeah, it's about having, and some people dislike this phrase. Okay,
Right.
things in your toolbox. Well, actually, I sort of think you need sharpened tools in your toolbox. Whether it's using tape, whether it's using electrotherapy, whether it's using exercise, whether it's using communicative modes, and so like what I think is going to help that patient to get to where it is they need to get to. And normally, there's a chat between myself and the patient. So it is about some hybrid of shared decision making. But yeah, you're right. I mean, people normally associate me with, there's an exercise solution, but I've said it countless times before. Not every patient requires an exercise solution.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting though, because when it comes to, especially often in our own time, we're often sharing some of this stuff. There's a professional and there's a personal overlapping, isn't there? There's always a
Yeah,
professional.
of course there is.
We're always coming across professionally and within the scope of what that word means. But generally, when it comes to the personal stuff, is that people do start to pay attention to the fact that what is it we're interested in? What is it we happen to be doing with our bodies in the weekends and stuff? So I think that's one of the reasons I think people will associate exercise with you so strongly. What do you think of because that complacency word is one that I use an awful lot. Like what do you fear? I guess maybe I'm putting words in your mouth here, but when I read that and I know you and I know your opinions on this, I sense this sort of like a bit of urgency. Like you seem to be fearing a little bit of what could be if this complacency continues to set. Can you just describe to me what it is you maybe are fearing for the future if we don't take heed of what you're advising?
Well, do I fear for the future? I don't. I think it's really important for me to put it out there. I don't fear from a protectionist perspective, and the reason why I put this out here, this is to all the graduate sports therapists who I may have upset with this piece. Yeah, because I didn't refer to them, because I spent most of last week replying to people and just trying to say, look, actually, it wasn't about protectionism, okay, for the physiotherapy profession and excluding everybody else. No, not at all. It was really saying the physiotherapy profession needed to pull its socks up, because actually it needed to up its game, because there are associations such as graduate sports physiotherapists, such as graduate sports therapists who are doing an absolute sterling job. Yeah. So, to a certain extent, the fact that I didn't refer to you, it might sound like a backhanded compliment, but it was a compliment, because your initial training is very much geared towards their overlap, and also athletic trainers as well. So I put it out there. It's not about protectionism, but I do fear that actually, because it's it's not just the physiotherapy profession who should be able to work with these individuals and should be able to deliver high quality exercise based prescription, but at the moment we don't do it very well. And so actually, there's a chance that actually we will be pigeonholed into this diagnostic remit, if you like, where we seem to be merging towards, and we'll end up losing quite a lot of our skills. Bearing in mind, exercise is a core skill, according to the Child Society of Physiotherapy, and I think it is. So that's probably where I'm going, but it's not because of protectionism.
Yeah, I can see that, and I think it can be red rag to a bull sometimes, can't it? When there's people think it's ominous that there's an omission, whereas
yes.
I know you enough to know that there was not as if you were sort of being really narrowly focused on it. I think what's intriguing to me was that you make suggestions in the piece about. I've heard much of the argument, but I hadn't necessarily heard Uzo's take on what some of the solutions would look like. And I think you were advanced practice sort of and aspirations in a physio's career, but and also in your physio's higher education. You sort of 11+ education where they could aspire to what would be considered as advanced practice reasoning within that, which would integrate strength and conditioning principles. That seems to be where you feel it's at, so that people can recognize that there's actually a long way that they could go, rather than it being of what they could achieve in physio, and therefore they go into these other bolt-on advanced practice skills. Am I understanding that correctly?
Indeed. Yeah. No, you're understanding that perfectly well. It's a rite of passage. Postgraduate education is a rite of passage, okay, for medics. Yeah, it's a rite of passage, pretty much, okay, for strength and conditioning professionals. Rite of passage. But it just seems to be in our game, right? If you're interested in taking a rehabilitation-based approach, okay, well, postgraduate education is not really emphasized, fundamentally. Whereas actually, what we see is, in terms of postgraduate education, it's a must if you want to go into a diagnostic role. And in fact, I'll even go a step further. If you want to go into a diagnostic role, then there are set competencies. Yeah, okay, they are competencies which are based upon, a orthopedic registrar's training, fundamentally in the outpatient setting. Mm-hmm. But where's our core rehabilitation competencies? And this is the problem, isn't it? Because the assumption is once you've qualified, and you've moved into outpatients and you've quote unquote specialized, well, that's it. Right. That's it. There's no requirement, if you like, to do any postgrad education, formal postgrad education, dare I say, and actually, it's kind of it's sort of silly, really, because we would expect that standard for people working in diagnostics, but we wouldn't expect that standard for people working in rehabilitation. What does it say? It says that actually the value around rehabilitation is probably not as great. And if it is as great, then what it means is it's almost like, well, you've got to be working at a slightly higher level to be in a diagnostic clinic. But you don't have to be working at that level to be, delivering advanced practice in rehabilitation. And I'll give you a simple example. Let's look at agility. Yeah, you have a patient, okay, who you're taking through their rehab, they're post-surgical, and they want to go back to an invasion sport. Say, for example, recreational invasion sport. Okay, football, rugby, whatever. Maybe even it's tennis. Okay, our problem here is when we talk about at the late stage of rehab, we should be doing some agility training. Everybody would agree with that, but actually. Yeah, most people will reach for the agility ladders as if that was enough. Whereas actually, if you think about it, when you look at it, it's like, well, what we're actually talking about is change of direction ability or change of direction speed, which means that you need to have some biomechanics to underpin that. So you need to understand a little bit about that. You need to understand some of the training sides. You need to understand what it is you're dealing with. And I think actually, unless you've done that post-grad education, okay, you wouldn't be able to
I always think that
use that effectively.
This is what's interesting, is that I think partly I'll admit my bias sometimes a lot of the time is against sort of formalized higher education. I sort of fell out with it quite a while ago. Not for necessarily really poor personal experiences, but some of that. But it was mainly just me sort of losing faith with the sort of the reasoning and rehabilitation, which I saw core to my heart. It was like, just felt like it was moving away from that, and I just didn't need to jump. I didn't need to be on that treadmill, especially with the independence that I hold. And therefore, what I'd done is I'd heard your points that you'd always made about career progression and stuff, and then I'd wrongly not then associated that if you were to try to develop those advanced practice rehabilitation roles and things, and I've got colleagues that have really trying to carve that out. So people like Tom Flanagan and stuff have made that case, and they're always, using that. But that makes sense in sort of career, sort of internal competency infrastructure. But then actually, if you don't have that, those credible ways in which you could aspire to higher education, like codified education, rather than sort of the education that we're sort of central to providing, that CPD stuff, which is obviously less accredited. I think that's a really interesting point I hadn't really thought of. I suppose one of the things I wonder is, has that horse bolted a little bit? Like our clinical lead here at Choose Health has a MSc as you're getting in S&C, so that they've ended up having to go extra professionally, almost like it was that their career goals as well as their education goals have ended up being in a direction that the profession can't provide. Therefore, that sidestep, obviously, it's great to bring other things in, but interestingly, you're making a case that actually, having that proper linkage to MSK practice, you feel would be more appropriate. Do you think that would have been attractive for you, and you wouldn't have gone to do an MSc masters? Do you think you would have done sort of an advanced MSK rehabilitation masters modules and the like? And I just wondered. I struggle to think. I'm admitting to you, I struggle to think in this direction because I don't look to those things these days. But where's your head at with that?
Yeah, no, I probably would have. Look, I probably would have, and I think this is the tension, isn't it? Our tension at the moment is, so people will often approach me and say, what course should I do? I'm interested in S&C. I'm interested in, well, no, actually what they'll say is I'm interested in rehabilitation, and they'll say, what sort of course should I do? And I'm always very reticent to say go and do that course or go and do this MSc, because what I've actually found myself is, so I did an MSc in neuromusculoskeletal physiotherapy, okay, and that was really helpful for me because it gave me my basic grounding around clinical reasoning, and around the generality, if you like, of musculoskeletal health. And I really needed that. Yeah. Right. Some people don't, but I really needed that to really have a really good framework so I could use different things. But then what I found was that, exercise and rehabilitation didn't really prepare me very well from an exercise training perspective. So when I then decided that, okay, I needed to do something else, people said, well, why don't you do a PhD? I said, well, there's nothing I'm really interested in. But actually, I would like to really take my rehabilitation skills to another level. So then I started looking into S&C. And the difficulty with the S&C, with most of the S&C courses, and this is where it's a problem as a profession, is that the S&C courses fundamentally are all about performance. The vast majority of them. Some will have a, if you like, injury slant or bias to it, but it's really about performance. So what I then had to do was I then had to find the links, which in a way, from an educational perspective, was very good, because it meant I had to understand their stuff, and I had to then try to apply it to a physiotherapy and a patient-related, if you like, setting. So it was very good from a learning perspective in terms of immersing myself. But and this is the big but. The big but is this: if you, and this is a personal opinion, if you went straight into it and you didn't have a good grounding in neuromusculoskeletal physiotherapy, I think it could be a lot of people's undoing, because everything would look like an exercise solution. Everything would find the problem with it is because it's exercise based and it's training based and so on. The chances is that if you didn't have that essential underpinning from neuromusculoskeletal physiotherapy, and because it's so performance based, most things could finish with an exercise-based solution,
and that's too mechanical.
Yeah, absolutely,
therefore
absolutely,
right.
Absolutely. And this is why I think we need our own, if you like, or and even if it's not our own, we can take it from other sources. Yeah, and this might be quite a nice way to collaborate nicely with the graduate exercise therapists and the athletic trainers. Is, we get these core competencies in what does really good rehabilitation look like. And I don't want people to get confused with, oh, I'm talking about the high-end stuff. Because look, an understanding of biomechanics is essential if you want someone to sit to stand. Yeah, and if you want to be able to have the flexibility, okay, to be able to change things and to mold things and to change training programs based upon what the client needs, then again, an understanding of muscle physiology and training science actually could be really, really helpful. Yeah, because it's the ability to be able to take things from different places and apply it. The same with skill acquisition. If you're getting out of a chair, how might you change that? How might you modify that? How might you use, skill acquisition and, more, if you like, movement related, movement related ideas to change that patient's experience.
Yeah, because that's the thing. That's definitely a thing that I've been really aware of in recent years. Is the ability to understand, and I didn't realize I was doing it until I got it flagged when someone was shadowing me. Is that the ability to understand biomechanics enough to know the real relevant differences of what you're asking of different body parts and the forces you're distributing across someone's body when they deadlift versus when they squat. When those are blended movements, right? There are in between. Do you get someone deadlifting in a trap bar? It looks more like a squat than a deadlift, depending on how you cue it and how they organize themselves if you just give them the task to do. And those things don't matter until they matter. Like in some cases, it's just functional exposure, fine. But then in some cases, it's really relevant and it's more comfortable for them to do that. Or there's a confidence that gets built from them being able to see that and to work on that hip hinge or vice versa. And I think that's where the specificity is relevant. And I think that's where that complacency sets in when people think it never is, which I think is fascinating. Now, the signal has been a bit unstable at times, and therefore I've not drawn on some of the comments. Thank you to Dan, Stacey, Joe, etc., that have posted some comments, and I've got one that I feel like I can't skip past, and then we'll have to leave it there, Uzo, because I'm nicking more of your time than I'm due.
That's no problem. My lunch break comes to an end.
Right, yeah, cool. No, you get yourself off. Yeah, just to finish, if you could. Asked if you is it that you'd like to see rehab defined and measured specifically differently to say those of a sports therapist?
No, not really.
So you're kind of.
I don't think so. No, not really.
You don't necessarily oppose MSKR's point about the fact that the MSK professions typically need to be. Yeah. So
no, absolutely, no, absolutely not. I mean, that would be foolish on my part to say something like that, because it doesn't make any sense at all. Because no, but it doesn't, does it? It doesn't make any sense at all. I think the whole point of the blog was really to try to get across to people that what I think is we've been paternalistic to the medical profession, okay, since our beginnings. Okay, World War I was the start of the physiotherapy profession. Okay, the best thing that we could have done back then was to align ourselves with the medical profession. Why? Because it gave us credibility and it also gave us authority. But if you like, the tenet of my argument is that because of that, okay, what we've done is we've effectively basically dropped our game, in as much as, okay, we always thought we were going to be the people who would be the exercise leaders. And actually, you know, all these different groups are coming in, graduate sports therapists, athletic trainers, strength and conditioning professionals. They're now coming in and actually they're bypassing us as a profession.
Yeah.
Why?
The exercise physiologists as well on the more physiological sports.
Indeed.
And stuff. Like, you know, there are a
Indeed.
few out there, and we need to let's up our game. I mean, I'm well up for that.
That's all it is.
That's it. I love that, and I love that call to arms. So yeah, thanks so much as ever for your time. Really appreciate it. Now, I do want to correct you on one thing though. When people ask you what course you should I go on, etc., you should be answering instinctively, you should just attend Therapy Live, which of course you will be speaking at in a month's time, and so that should be on the tip of your tongue. So
of course, it should be.
Told.
Of course, it should be.
And that, following that, I imagine, I know you'll stir the pot a bit. You're speaking on another one of your passions, aren't you?
Yeah, about climbing. Actually, I don't think we've yet confirmed the title, but yeah, it's going to be around rehabilitation and how to make
that's
sense of that
someone
climber.
chasing Uzo up. So let's go with that. Thanks a lot, mate. Take care.
Worries.
Cheers.
Pleasure.